How's it going today? My name's Erik Velsko. I've been a Bristol Bay fisherman since '99 was my first year as a crew member. I took a few years off when I was in college. I fished Cook Inlet just because the timing didn't work out, and then back in Bristol Bay, '05 as a permit holder and boat owner. So wow, that's 20 years. So I was kind of there during the really bad times and then saw it kind of take the increase up. We also have a couple other long line vessels and pot cod vessels that fish in the Gulf and the Bering Sea.
My name's Maddie. I'm with Alaska Woods and Permits in Homer and on the board of the North Pacific Fisheries Association. I do not fish Bristol Bay, but I have been there quite a few times and I really enjoy it. So I'm gonna start sharing my screen. This is a presentation, kind of just a top level presentation on kind of where we're at as an industry statewide, the problems that we have been facing, what led to those problems, what might still be contributing to those problems, and what we might be able to do about those problems. I don't mind if people have questions. If they want to unmute and ask questions, by all means, go for it. We'll stumble through it together. Okay. You guys see my screen? Yeah.
Yep, we can see it.
Thank you. Okay. Okay. So this was Erik and I are both part of the North Pacific Fisheries Association. And just a quick about us, we're a commercial fishing industry group. We were founded in 1955, originally to negotiate crab prices. We're based out of Homer, but our membership fishes almost every fishery in the state. Halibut, cod, black cod, salmon, crab, just about every gear type except trawl, I think. And we're pretty heavily involved in both state and federal industry management and regulatory processes. Okay, some of these numbers are a little dated because things kind of hit the fan. This is like a before and after point here, but also numbers take time, so there aren't a ton of brand new numbers. So these are statewide numbers from 2022. In 2022, remember like the good old days when things were good and people had money and we were catching fish. As a state, we harvested almost 5 billion pounds of seafood, was worth about $2 billion at the dock. And it resulted in about 2.3 billion pounds of actual product worth over $5 billion. As an industry, we generated nearly $60 million in fisheries taxes for 52 separate municipal governments. There are municipal governments in the state who rely either almost entirely or entirely on fisheries taxes from people like you. In addition, we contributed nearly $16 billion to the US economy. Again, statewide 2022 figures, there are about 48,000 people employed in the industry. About 17,000 of them are residents. Of those, there were over 24,000 fishermen, and then a lot of processing workers as well. Over 8,000 fishing vessels were registered to fish in Alaska in 2022. And there were about 7,500 permit holders, of which almost 5,000 were Alaska residents. And I was personally shocked to find out that permit holders come from every state in America, and crew comes from every state, 14 different countries, 5 Canadian provinces, and 3 US territories. So we are well represented here. Okay, these ones are specific to Bristol Bay. Your faces are in my way. There. So in 2022, Bristol Bay accounted for 42% of the Alaska salmon harvest by volume and 50% of the state's harvest by ex-vessel value. So you guys are bringing a lot to the table. In terms of the people and the permits, Bristol Bay residents owned 125 of the nearly 1,500 Alaska resident held permits. So these are not out of state people, but of the Alaska residents that own Bristol Bay drift or set net permits, 125 of them are actually Bristol Bay residents, which is not very many. It's like 8% of them. This is something that we should be working on. In terms of the value of those permits, one thing that I think paints a really, really clear picture of where we were at in 2022 versus where we are at right now in 2025. In 22, those Bristol Bay drift permits on average for the year were trading at about $245,000. I believe that we sold a lot of them, and I believe that the highest we sold was $260,000 in 2022. Now in 2025, on average, they're at about 145. In reality, they're more in the 150 something range. But for set net permits in 2022, they were roughly $74,000. And as of right now, they're roughly $60,000. So you can definitely see that there's been kind of a shift. But we're headed in the right direction. Last year and the year before, those permits were down even more. They went from about $260,000 to $130,000. They were cut in half. In terms of earnings and revenue specific to Bristol Bay, 105 Bristol Bay resident permit holders earned an estimated $11.5 million in 2022. And Bristol Bay resident permit holders, as a fishery, Bristol Bay salmon fishermen accounted for almost $10 million in tax revenue. So you guys are really contributing a lot. And I think that that's an important thing to remind. I'm actually in DC right now. I just have been meeting with people here and reminding them of how much fishermen bring to the table. In 2021 and 2022, on average, statewide, the industry generated about $430 million in labor income and over $844 million in economic output. And that is incredibly significant. Things changed. So things are happy in 2022. People were fishing, they were catching fish. It was worth a lot of money. People were happy. Between 2022 and 2023, the industry took a nearly $2 billion direct hit. There was about a 50% loss in profitability. There was over a 30% drop in ex-vessel value, over 25% drop in first wholesale value. And I do want to point out the discrepancy there, that the fishermen at the dock took a larger hit than the first wholesale value did. And we lost nearly 40,000 fishing and non-fishing jobs across the country. Specifically because of this, we saw a decline in total US output of over $4 billion and about $270 million decrease in state and local tax revenues, which is really, really significant. And I'm sure Bristol Bay Borough has experienced a similar thing to especially the communities farther out the chain that are really struggling because of these issues. Okay, what happened? Between 2022 and 2023, we kind of had this perfect storm where all of these different factors came into play kind of at the same time. And when it rains, it pours, and it really, really poured. In part, there was an excess inventory. Anyone in Bristol Bay or anyone fishing Bristol Bay remembers 2022. But not just that. There was, Russia harvests a lot of the same species that we do. They had a huge run. There was a lot of fish being dumped on the market that year. At the same time, we also saw decreased demand. So we've got this insane supply situation. And at the same time, we had significant inflation issues, and it was really affecting consumer spending. our social and cultural practices abroad changed. Japan wasn't as interested in black cod as they have been, for instance. And there just was not the international demand that there used to be, and that as an industry statewide, we've really counted on. Because we have counted on a lot of those international markets for so long, and they've been such a stable avenue for us, there has been less domestic marketing efforts than would have been ideal, probably in hindsight. So not only do we lose these massive international markets very, very quickly, we didn't really have a plan B, and those markets take a very long time to develop. In addition to inflation, we also saw a stark rise in operating costs. If any of you have paid an insurance bill recently, I'm sure that you are struggling with all of these things, but not just insurance. We have labor and fuel and parts and shipping, and all of the things got so much more expensive. Meanwhile, interest rates are rising, so it's much more expensive to borrow money to bridge that gap. International shipping costs were on the rise, social responsibility costs, everything got more expensive. Russia had a fun war with Ukraine going on that they needed to pay for, and a lot of fish coming in. So they ended up dumping a lot of fish on the market at much lower prices than we could compete with, in part because they don't have the same labor and safety and sustainability and economic environmental standards that we do and that we have to comply with. So they're able to produce these fish and harvest these fish, process these fish at much lower costs than we can here. So there was no way to compete with them on the open market and the international market. At the same time, the US dollar was incredibly strong during those years, which made it very expensive for other countries to import our fish, especially like the yen, for instance, in Japan hit an all-time 40-year low or something like that. So Japan being a really large market, that was a big hit for us as well, and made Russian seafood even cheaper than American seafood by comparison. So things like those tariff imbalances and different non-tariff barriers really hampered the ability of the domestic seafood industry to access those markets that we have relied on so heavily.
And also, to add to it, the farm salmon industry is they obviously had their rocky moments early on, but they've really upped their quality game, upped their distribution. So they're consistent quality, consistent price, and that's all stuff that buyers really like, which makes it hard for our these are wild capture fisheries in Alaska, and especially Bristol Bay, how it's so volatile. It makes it hard for buyers to depend on it. And then you throw in I think, what was it, 22 or 3? I can't remember, the big, huge volume year where we didn't go on limits, and there was a huge glut of sockeye, and the quality was on some of those days was subpar. That adds to the price, the decrease in price we saw. We had that massive shift down to where it came out at 50-cent base. I think it went up to 80 though, when it was all said and done. But that's all stuff to factor in these. These are all global markets now too. It's not, we don't have the only fish in the world anymore, and so Bristol Bay is almost just a niche now in the grand scheme of things. These are multi-billion-dollar companies we're competing against on the farm fish side. So that's why quality is super important for Bristol Bay now, is because I started out when we were still putting them in I had web mesh brailers my first year with no RSW, and just the whole nature of the fishery was completely different than it is now. But we need to continue to evolve too. We can't stagnate out and kind of hold where we're at. We need to kind of keep moving forward. So we need to be innovating and continuing to improve, because it's that farm salmon is it's getting better and better and better, and we need to at least try to keep up.
I think That's a fantastic point. And also, once you lose those markets due to either poor quality or lack of consistency, they're hard to get back. And it takes a lot of work to get those markets in the first place. Outside of that nice perfect storm that we were working with, climate change, rising ocean temperatures, stock collapses, run failures, these environmental changes and factors were also playing a big part in everything kind of coming to a head there. And like Erik just said, the quality really took a hit, and made us considerably less competitive in the global marketplace, really. And then a big part of this that Erik probably could speak to a little bit better is the role of infrastructure and working waterfronts in this industry, and how important public dock spaces, cold storage, access to ice and bait, especially in every coastal community, really. I'm sure, Erik, do you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, so when we originally did this presentation in Homer is a unique place because it has a public dock with public cranes, actually, and it's not just one little crane that can lift a couple tons. It's there's 10-ton cranes on that dock. You can lift a seine skiff if you want. So most of us that are home ported here, we do most of our own stuff. We're basically off the umbilical cord of a processor, which is always how it's been in Alaska. Is we've, at least for the shoreside harvesters, we've always kind of hitched our wagon to a processor, which is fine, but you lose a little bit of your independence when you do that. And you see it the further west you go. You look at some of these big ports like Akutan and Dutch Harbor, and there's very little dock space available for people to do their own thing. And that makes it challenging when people try to direct market or do, kind of think outside of the box, especially for like your local community members. It's for them, if they're not a big volume producer, it's probably a better business plan for a lot of these people to be trying to direct market and taking care of their fish really well and getting them into these high-end niche markets because they're there. But it's just the lack of infrastructure in most of these places is it's a problem. So that's stuff we need to work on with our congressional delegation in the state, and try to figure out ways for people to kind of get out from under the umbrella of being totally wrapped up with a processor. Not that that's all bad. It's just in order to maintain that independence, you got to have an avenue to operate independently, and without that, you're kind of beholden to the powers that be. And you can tell in Bristol Bay, especially. I mean, we're down to what is it, 4 or 5 processors, with the exception there's a couple small independent ones, but 4 or 5 major processors. We've got, with the recent acquisition of OBI and Silver Bay and Peter Pan, that's all one conglomerate. And then you have the Camphisco conglomerate, which is made up of a whole slew of those. I think Maddie has a slide on that. And then Trident and Copper River. That's pretty different from when I started. There used to be 15 or 20 trampers that were up there every year. There was 0 last year. So things are changing. So I like to see the projects like Ben Blakey's thing going, and people thinking outside the box and doing stuff different, because it's a big enough resource where everyone can kind of take a little piece of the pie, and we don't need it. It doesn't need to be just one entity controlling the whole thing because they have the most power, So that's something that, fishermen have to they have to think a little bit on their own too. And you have to kind of help yourself a little bit, but at the end of the day, there can be a good return on taking a little bit of risk and thinking outside the box.
I think a good example of how important those public dock spaces and public utilities are, or a good way that it manifests, is in Kodiak, where they don't have that, like the dock price, the ex-vessel price for halibut is consistently like $1 more. I'm sorry, $1 or more less than it is in Homer. And I think a large part of that, at least, is that there is competition. These public cranes allow for just about anyone to come buy halibut, and fishermen are able to just sell to the highest bidder. And that's kind of a unique thing that I took for granted, for sure. I didn't realize that that is not how it was everywhere. So things like that really favor the fishermen. You know, it's just the more options you have, and the more competition that you can have in the market, the better. Okay, here's our processor consolidation slide. Do you want to take that one, Erik?
Yeah, so this you know, this is going to be an interesting salmon season because I don't think we've ever had an entity with that big of a market share, with Silver Bay acquiring these other assets, in Bristol Bay particularly, and then not counting the rest of the state. So I'm kind of going into it with a little bit of trepidation. We fish for Silver Bay and have for, you know, a handful of years here. But it's a little, it's just interesting to see that it's the kind of the volume model on steroids, I guess. Because as these other entities couldn't make it, whether that was business management or the numbers didn't make sense or exiting the fishery for whatever reason, it kind of whoever's left holding the cards ends up absorbing all these other companies. So you have the Canfisco conglomerate, which was the biggest one before this OBI Silver Bay acquisition. That was Red Salmon Cannery, E&E's rolled into that. Leader Creek, AGS, Peterson Point, that is a big chunk of the fleet. And then now we'll have the Peter Pan that got rolled into Silver Bay last year, kind of has operated kind of independently, but kind of not, you know, rolled under that Silver Bay umbrella. And then OBI, Orca Bay is kind of their distribution network for Silver Bay, and then some Trident assets like in False Pass and down in Southeast. But and then you really just have Trident and Copper River, and then your smaller independent ones, which are, you know, I commend those guys like Tony Woods and some of these Amanda in Naknek there. That it's there is an opportunity for things like that if guys go out on a limb and make it work. But just the logistical hangups for doing something outside of the box in Bristol Bay is pretty tough. You know, just you have the infrastructure problems, plus you have the you've got tides to deal with, you know, to get in and out of the rivers for offloading, and then there's tender issues, and so this will be a very interesting year. Could go really well, and I mean the market's good. It's I have a buddy that's a fish buyer down south, and he said 775 to 825 for 4 to 6 pound sockeye, H&G. That's the highest it's ever been ever. And the cheapest fillets that you can find are $10 a pound, but you can't find them. And those are for that would be the smaller size of fish, 2 to 4 pound fish. So the market looks good. It's just a matter of, you know, how the run comes in, and you know, how if we don't have big massive peak days, and if we can take care of that product and get it to market in good shape, then I think there'll be a lot of upside this season. So but we are down to just a handful of processors in Bristol Bay, so always a little scary when that happens.
Yeah, and I listed off some of the concerns about consolidation there, in addition to everything that Erik just mentioned. You know, processor consolidation can lead to fewer resources for the fleet, less support for the fleet. We just talked about reduced competition, which typically means lower prices for fishermen, or can lead to price manipulation even. Erik mentioned kind of being heavily dependent on a single processor, or kind of almost forced exclusivity, where if you don't buy from them, I'm sorry, if you don't sell to them, they won't provide you with anything, or you can't even tie up to the dock sometimes. And then a significant risk of that single point failure issue without a backup plan can be pretty significant. And then, like I mentioned earlier, the economic shock to coastal communities when processors disappear. like what we're seeing in False Pass right now, is really hard. And then what Erik was saying, just because they have just kind of eaten up everything around them, they almost have to prioritize quantity over quality in order to pay their bills, but it's not what the market wants. So then again, the fishermen are kind of getting the butt end of that and getting much lower prices than maybe they otherwise could have. Okay, that was all really depressing. What's next? There are a few different angles to kind of come at this from, and there's a lot of different moving pieces, and there are things like in progress that hopefully will help some things. One of them is just the fact that that huge amount of salmon has really cleared out of freezers. The demand is stronger, the supply is less than it was. Like Erik just mentioned, the price could be really good this year. Could not be. But one of the what's next aspects would be legislation, both at a state level and a federal level. And there's been state and federal seafood task forces, salmon task forces, things like this that are trying to address some of these needs and identify possible solutions and kind of help push them through the implementation process. There's been state and federal legislative action. For instance, the state of Alaska last year kind of artificially reduced interest rates on state loans, which I work with the sale of boats and permits and quota. And I can personally say that I think it's really helped a lot of our clients, especially who were looking at a 10.5% interest rate and ended up only paying 5.25%. And that's really significant, even on just like $100,000 loan or a $200,000 loan. So even just minor tweaks like that actually don't have anything to do with fish can at least help support the fleet in harder times like this. At a federal level, there's a big push to get seafood included in the USDA farm bill, which gives, it's an agriculture specific bill right now. Seafood is not included in it, but it gives ag producers access to all sorts of things. I mean, there are some heavy subsidies. There are also low interest loan programs. There's crop insurance. They have a lot of marketing assistance and things like that agriculture gets that seafood doesn't currently have access to. There is a big push to have seafood included in that. And I think it's got bipartisan support at this point. The Fishes Act, I actually was just talking to Senator Sullivan about this earlier today. He's real excited to get this kind of pushed through the Commerce Committee. The freedom fish, meaning fish from America, not from Russia, really. And he's still really pushing for that to continue that ban on Russian seafood. Things at a state level like ASME funding can be important, especially as we have lost access to some of our international markets and as we push to develop more domestic markets. That takes money, and ASME needs funding in order to do those things. And then just last week, the Trump administration issued the seafood executive order that is aimed at trying to kind of cut through some of the red tape, deregulate where possible, support with marketing programs and things like that. There's no, at this point, clear pathway or time frame for any of those things, but it is nice to know that they are being considered. Erik talked about infrastructure, just increasing access to public use docks and cranes, upgrades to harvesting equipment and processing equipment and systems. Data infrastructure is important. The scientific infrastructure that we have to know how many fish are in the water and what we can take out could all do with some updating. So that's another kind of angle to come at this issue from. Erik talked about quality for a while. The fact that the domestic market, especially, but even the global market, really cares about quality and consistency. And that's something that farmed fish have. They're high quality and they're consistently high quality and they're consistently available. Whereas we obviously fluctuate with runs, and with that, there are sometimes quality losses. Focusing on quality also can reduce your exposure from run failures if you're not so heavily dependent on the number of fish that you catch, because you're getting a great price per pound because if they're high quality. You can kind of insulate yourself from that, which is significant, especially given the run collapses that we've been facing recently. And then markets. Erik mentioned kind of getting creative and helping yourself a little bit. And if you can kind of stick your neck out, it can pay off. And I think that we've started to see that. If there's a silver lining that comes out of all of this, I think it is that fishermen are incredibly resilient, and they are creative problem solvers. So things like direct marketing, finding your own markets, working on quality, all of these things, you know, what do they say? Necessity is the mother of innovation, I think, or something like that. I think that they have pushed people to really take a hard look at the way that they operate, and whether they're operating that way just because it's how they've always operated and it's how their dad operated, or if they're operating that way because it is truly the best way to be operating. Anything to add to that, Erik?
Yeah, so on the quality and market side, I spoke about it a little bit at the Homer function, and we did this in our Pacific cod fishery out in Western Alaska. We totally shifted that was strictly a volume fishery. The pot cod fishery out west was, you know, you did your business plans on millions of pounds, you know, but between 1 and 3 million pounds was what you kind of needed to catch to make ends meet. And then we took a massive price reduction in 24. We went from almost 50 cents a pound down to 25 cents a pound. It was $1, sometimes up to $1.20. Fuel was almost $5. It didn't even make sense. And we caught a ton of fish that season. And after that year, it was like, okay, we're not doing this anymore. And we kind of emulated our whole system after that. We had done a few trips to Iceland to we'd heard about this processing technology and onboard handling. And after going over there, it was like, holy cow, we've got a lot to do in Alaska. I had no idea, you know, just growing up here and fishing my whole life, multiple different fisheries from Bering Sea crab to longlining to Bristol Bay to seining. You know, I thought we kind of had it figured out. And when I got over there, it was like, oh my God, you know. So just looking at what those guys have done with their quality in handling, they consistently get, orders of magnitude more than we're getting for similar species. So it's stuff that's not unattainable. It takes a lot of work and setting up the markets and stuff. But there is a shift kind of happening right now. You can see these some of these e-commerce businesses have gotten fairly large. We're selling some of our fish to Wild Alaskan, who has a really good, strong connection with Bristol Bay. Actually, that was partly why it was founded, was the long-term connection in Bristol Bay. And so there is people thinking about innovation and different ways to do things. And when you are going direct to a customer too, there's a more of a connection there. And there's also you have to be a little bit more particular about your quality, because you're going to get direct feedback. Where if it's just lumped in with commodity products, you're not going to get that direct feedback. So it forces you to take care of that fish, because you know you're going to hear about it if it's not taken care of. And I think everyone in Bristol Bay needs to at least think that way a little bit. I've kind of seen in the last, probably 10 years, I wouldn't say slid further backwards, but we need to keep our focus on the quality side. We were doing a really good job. We were moving forward, and then we've kind of stumbled a little bit during those big years, which is hard because you have those huge runs. It's hard to keep up, and everyone's just focused on catching fish, and the markets were good. So it was like, catch as much as you can. I mean, some of our biggest years we've ever had were the last handful of years. But we need to keep our eye on the kind of the long-term goals of how we want this fishery to look in 20 years or 50 years. And that should be everyone's focus, and getting more permits in the hands of the coastal community members, all that stuff. Because it's when you turn these into these volume fisheries, you start to lose kind of the fabric of the communities, and that's a problem. You know, you can see with that one slide, I didn't know it was that low. The coastal community members permit ownership. I thought it was at least 400 or 500, which is naive of me, I guess. But I guess so when I think about it, because I don't know that many people anymore that I did have when we first started. There was a lot of people that lived up in villages and up on Lake Iliamna, and those people are all gone now. Whether, you know, some of them retired and stuff too, but still, it's there's less interest from the younger generation, and that's I don't know why, because it could be such a good thing for some people, but it could be partly focused because there's such a focus on volume in that fishery that we've kind of left some of those coastal members you know, off on the sidelines. And so I think, you know, so like I said, there's room for everyone, and we need to just be moving ahead on quality, marketing, all that sort of stuff. And BBSR DA does a good job with, you know, they've got their hands full too, and just kind of just keep the momentum going and not slide backwards. You know, there's just little things on board guys can do too to just always be thinking like, hey, this is going to go on someone's plate, you know, and if it's bad quality or if I'm not taking care of it, you know, when you're not taking care of fish, you know, and just to be thinking when you're out there, either operating a tender or a fishing boat, that quality is the most important thing now. So there's some markets that are looking at it. I don't want to name any names yet, but we're going to bring some stuff on one of our tenders up to the bay, some of our slurry ice equipment, and do some pilot projects and start testing out some thinking outside of the box type of deals for Bristol Bay and some of the other areas around the state. So there's, you know, it all takes baby steps in Alaska. It's always been like that. It's just we have a diverse fleet. We have tons of fishermen. We've got a lot more fishermen than some of these other countries as far as, you know, independent operators. And so it just takes a long time to get everyone on the same page. But when we do, you know, we can be pretty powerful and effective.
I think another thing that I should have put on here and did not is, like Erik said, a lot of people are retiring and young people aren't getting into these fisheries. And I think there's an education aspect to that I know Sea Grant is working really hard to address, and others are working really hard to address. But there's also, I believe that there's also kind of a confidence issue. And if you don't see, as a young person, I have a hard time imagining that if I don't see investment in the industry, if I don't see, you know, the state investing in port infrastructure or the federal government investing in the fishing industry, or really supporting the fishing industry, it would be hard to want to invest in it myself. So I think that there's also, you know, or if you see these like stock collapses, or they're cutting surveys or whatever it is, and that's outside of how expensive it is and how hard it is to get access to these fisheries. So I think there's a lot to be said for programs like that as well, either addressing education issues or addressing operating costs or access barriers to access, or whatever angle you want to take there to try to address the graying of the fleet. And on that note, I would say that if you're sitting there and thinking, well, like, God, this was kind of depressing, and what can we do about this? I think it is easy to assume that because you are one person, that you don't have the power to make a change. And I think whether it's small quality tweaks, like Erik was just saying, or maybe trying new things like slurry ice, or whatever that means to you, that does really help. You know, direct marketing is incredible. It really, really makes Alaska seafood look good, telling that story and things like that. And that's a one-person job. You can absolutely do that. The other thing that I think is incredibly important to remember is how powerful advocating for your fisheries can be, whether it's at a state level and you're attending Board of Fish meetings, or you're attending Fish and Game Advisory Committee meetings, whether it's just you join a gear group, or it's a federal at the federal level and you're participating in the International Pacific Halibut Commission meetings or council meetings. I think that can be incredibly powerful. I think it's easy for some of these people to sit up there and not have that boots on deck perspective that you guys might have. And I think it's really, really valuable. I think it's a terrifying thing to do, to go testify in front of the Board of Fish or to go testify in front of the council. But I think it's really, really powerful and really important. And especially for people that are investing their incredibly hard-earned money into these fisheries. I think advocating for your fisheries is one of the best things that you can do to protect those investments that you're making. So, that's it. We would be happy to take questions if anyone has questions, or Erik, if you have final thoughts, that's all I have to say.
No, I think that's good. The advocating part is good too. There isn't, people kind of assume there's always someone looking out for their best interest. And if you're an independent operator, you got to kind of look out for yourself. So we have a saying, our president at NPFA always says, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And that's true. So try to show up, even if you think your voice doesn't matter or your opinion doesn't matter, it does. And you know more than you think too, just by having that experience, because there's plenty of people involved in this process that don't know the fishing side or the operation side or the processing side. So that's an important part, is to maintain your advocacy for whatever sector you're in, or your fishery, or your community. So
I think it's just been that maybe they did have boots on deck experience, but it's been so long and the industry and the world has changed so much since then, that a fresh perspective is incredibly, incredibly important. And I think that, I guess I will also say that, yeah, it's terrifying sometimes to show up at those meetings and testify, but even just writing comment letters, you don't have to show your face, you don't have to buy a plane ticket. Even just writing comment letters, I think, is a really, really powerful way to make your voice heard, and it takes like 15 minutes. Anyone have questions?
I see one in there from there's one from Mark Nosti. It says, are there any long range opinions on run health considering climate factors? That's probably outside of our jurisdiction. I think it sounds like they're going to have something with Tim Sands down the line. That'd be a good Tim Sands question, I think. I'm not going to try to speak. Well, I mean, yeah, I've heard all kinds of different things, so and they would all just be opinions at this point. But as far as climate change and run health, that would be a good question for the biologist.
Mark, if you missed it, I think that Tim is presenting very soon. Tav could maybe confirm the date.
May 13th. Thank you so much. And he's very excited to address this question on May 13th.
Fantastic.
Are there any other questions?
I got one. On your process of consolidation, I guess, why wasn't the idea of consolidation could actually equate to a higher price by spreading the or reducing the expenses to process the fish, to tender the fish with less processors?
You want to take that one, Erik?
Yeah, I mean, it could be that could happen that way too. It's just historically that hasn't usually happened when as we consolidate. It's usually the fishermen are on the other end of the stick. But you know, with at least in Silver Bay's example, they are fisherman owned, part of it anyway. So maybe, you know, we don't know. I guess we won't know until the season happens and we follow the market and see where things are at. We know the prices are strong right now. I mean, if you can't even find sockeye, the buyers are all scrambling. There is none available. So the first go around here, we'll get a little indication from Copper River and see. But yeah, it could certainly equate to higher prices with, you know, because they are going to be spreading out costs and sharing tenders, and that could very well.
The issue is that you know, you've got economy of scale working in your favor, and yes, you can maybe make things more efficient and save money on the processor side. I think part of the issue is that does not always trickle down to the fishermen also.
Well, that's because of the lack of strength that the fishermen have with their processing. I mean, face it, we're the only ones who could harvest that fish. our weaknesses, we all can't stick together. I guess another question I have, and maybe you mentioned about how your organization is involved with setting or helping set the price of crab or determining the price of crab to the fishermen. Is that correct?
Sorry, I should have been clear. That's what we were originally formed to do back in the 50s.
Well, I was reading an article, I guess maybe it applied more or less to the Bering Sea king crab fishery, how they eliminated the strike where the fishermen and the processors got together and they actually, lack of a better word, is they get a price up front, but their final price comes from what the wholesale price is. Why couldn't a model similar to that work for salmon?
You could, yeah. I mean, that's been our problem all along. None of us have been able to get together and form a strong, I don't want to say union because people get so worried about that, but that's how in Iceland, that's how it is. They're unionized, and there's price negotiations on what, dock prices should be or base prices. And we are doing that with the cod buyer that we have now. We set a base price, and then we show each other our numbers, and at the end of the season we come up with the final price. And that's never how it's been in any other fishery I've operated in. And so that is a model for the future. But right now it's just kind of, we take what they give us, which you probably know. I'm sure you're involved in the fishery too. And I've always had a problem with that, but I also haven't ever sat the season out either. It seems like we just go no matter what now. And so taking some of that back into our own hands is, we do have more power than we think. But it's always been a tricky, tricky deal, especially in Bristol Bay. One of my radio partners said he remembers back in the 80s, they had some strike, and the guy leading the strike, was, had the black flag out, and then as soon as he saw some guy's net smoking, he pulled the black flag down, threw it in the forepeak, and started fishing. So sometimes it can be hard to hold back, but I think it's, and this is just how this system works in Alaska. We have to basically trust that the processor is gonna do the right thing. And I think on their end too, these costs are just out of control with labor, energy, and so they're kind of up against a wall too. So it's there's got to be a little give and take on both sides. But yeah, no, I agree. We should have organized a long time ago, and we'd be in a different situation right now.
There's a good.
Yeah, I guess I was just interested in that crab solution because, there were some lengthy strikes in that fishery in the past. They didn't swim upriver and spawn, so they had the time. But I don't hear any complaints from the harvesters, and I don't hear any complaints from the processors. So to me, it's been in effect for a while, and it seems to be working for both sides. I think we ought to spend some energy and see if that could be duplicated. Thank you. Good presentation. Appreciate it.
Thank you for the questions. There's a question in the chat. Catherine is asking, what's the best way for individuals or organizations to join in helping advocate for the Farm Bill or Freedom Fish or things like that? Is there an active coalition working on this? There are so many active groups working on this. I'm in DC right now working on this with fishing community coalitions. North Pacific Fisheries Association works on these things. Alaska Longline Fishermen's Association works on these things. United Fishermen's Association works on these things. There are so many different groups. And I think depending on, kind of what you believe, what you want to prioritize, kind of where your values align, there's certainly a group for you. If you want a list or something, I'm happy to provide one. But you don't need to be a part of a coalition or your group even to advocate for that. Advocating at a state level, you just, with your state representatives and state senators can be really powerful. And then calling, I think it sounds like it's not that important, but calling and emailing your federal senators and representative. Lisa Murkowski and Dan Sullivan are our senators, and Nick Begich is our sole lonely representative right now And I think that, you know, even if you don't have the opportunity to talk to them on the phone or face to face or something like that, they have incredible staff working really, really hard. And honestly, those are the people making things happen most of the time. So just getting on the phone and calling the legislative offices, sending emails, it truly, truly, truly can be helpful. Sometimes they just don't know that these issues are going on. No one has told them.
I see, Nadine, you have gone off mute. Are you interested in asking a question?
Yes, thank you for a really great talk today. I'm with Alaska Conservation Foundation, and I'm from False Pass in King Cove, so commercial fisherman also. And we have a workshop project accelerator coming up for the Aleutian region. Our host is APIA, more looking at like climate adaptation issues and solutions. But for sure, we're going to talk about some fisheries issues because that's what people in the communities are facing right now. I think this would be a really great talk or presentation to be able to bring to that forum, that workshop. It's the beginning of June. I was wondering if I can get a copy of your slide deck to share with APIA and see if they would be interested to ask you guys or invite you to come talk with us when we meet then.
Nadine, if you want to drop your email, you can just private message it to me in the conversation. I'm happy to email it to you.
Great, thank you.
Coming up on 1 o'clock. Does anyone else have any questions?
This is Catherine. I just wanted to thank you for that answer. I'd love to get more of our local groups pulled into some of the outreach on those bills. But I just also had a comment about quality. It just seems like I really appreciated that, Erik, that you pointed out how the consolidation of the processors kind of favors a volume over value over quality model. And I just think that fishermen obviously can always do better. And with large runs, we're always going to have room for improvement. But I do think that there's the accountability on quality right now is just a one-way street. Like the processors can hold us accountable in many ways, but like you pointed out, I feel like they're almost being incentivized less to even do that. Some of the processors that have historically always been quality focused are starting to reduce some of their quality requirements and have been looking at and talking about more volume incentives. So just with that system and a lack of there's no ability for the fishermen to hold the processors accountable for their quality issues. And I do think that there are a lot of them on these bigger years. Like, yes, a lot of the problems happen on board the boats, but a lot of the problems happen between us and the processing. So I just wanted to point that out. I don't really have a solution, but I do think that we should be looking for more ways to at least have conversations with them, if not find ways to hold them accountable as well.
Yeah, and they, they're in a tough situation too, because it happens everywhere where one processor will loosen up quality parameters, and then boats matriculate over to that. It happens. It's been happening out west for years with some of the fisheries where as one processor kind of cracks down on quality, then guys filter over to another processor that's paying the same price for doing less. So it just, it comes down. It's almost a whole mindset. I mean, we talk about this all the time now because of this cod thing we're involved in. And Alaska's got to kind of get out of this, like the load up mentality, and the deck loads and all that stuff. It's cool. It's fun. I did it too. I mean, I probably still do it, but in Bristol Bay, but we do need to think about what we're doing, and it's not that hard to go to the tender when your fish holds are full, and it's not that hard to keep your fish floating or get ice when you need to, and it's an extra step, but at the end of the day, we need to just all be thinking the same way. But on the other side, the processors also have to incentivize it, which has always been the hang up, is getting, the incentive to do it. And now though, it seems like there is quite a bit of incentive to for improved handling, whether that's the bleeding and the floating and different things like that, you can actually get your, significantly increase your price. So they're all thinking about it. I don't think, it's the nature of the beast in Bristol Bay. It's just such a everyone in the room knows how it is there. It's just it's a crazy place, and logistically and how fast the run comes in. So, but it's something we all need to kind of keep our eye on the ball.
Well, thank you both. Really appreciate you taking the time and sharing all this information.